Today I'm here to speak about an unfortunate incident that involved a Mrs. Karen, last name Day. She's 45 and a white female. Her date of birth is 3/5/1967. Last night she was fatally wounded by a couple of our police officers who responded to a domestic violence situation involving her as well as her husband. The reason I say it's an unfortunate situation is because not only is her family affected, but also the two officers who had to make that deadly decision to use the necessary force to address the situation that they encountered in the 700 block of North Spruce. Also affected is the community as a whole, because anytime we have to make a decision to use that force that's necessary to deal with a dangerous situation, it impacts the community. And so there again, it's very unfortunate for us as a community. Ironically, when you look at situations like last night as well as some previous situations we've been involved in throughout 2011, there's that deadly mix, and you probably say, what do you mean by that deadly mix, Chief? The fact that you have the dynamic interaction of the Wichita of police officers as well as offenders and the situation they're called to respond to. When you look at the situations that we've been involved in, each one of those cases we were requested, we were summoned by somebody, just like last night. At about 10:17 last night, we received a call of a gentleman that resided in the 700 block of North Spruce. The gentleman wanted to meet officers at Ash and Murdoch because he had a person that was inside of his residence that he wanted out. Needs to stay with his wife. His wife had obtained a protection from abuse order against him, which was in effect last night. Matter of fact, it was in effect through 2013. When the officers made contact with the gentleman there at Ash and Murdoch, they were able to get as much information as far as what was going on. He was concerned that he was violating the PFA because of the fact that she was at his house there in the 700 block. During that conversation, the gentleman also shared information that his wife has had some mental issues, some mental challenges, and so he wanted to make us aware of that. And so the officers was able to utilize that information. They left him, went to the address. The officers parked just to the north of the residence. They got there about 10:30 is when they arrived there in the 700 block of North Spruce. Upon arriving at that location, as I mentioned, they're walking to the residence. As they get close to the driveway of the residence in question, they can hear the door open. They see a female comes out on the front porch. They notice that the female had several items in her hand. One appeared to be a long lighter that is used to ignite a furnace or a barbecue grill. There was also a bottle in her hand as well as a knife. One of the officers yelled knife to his colleague to make them aware that the lady had a knife. While the lady was on the front porch, she took it upon herself to start stabbing herself. She stabbed herself in the chest, as well as in the abdomen area. The officers, they were in the middle part of the driveway when they noticed this. She comes off of the porch area, approaches the officers. There again, she still has a knife in her hand, and the blade part of the knife is pointed towards the officers. As she comes off the porch, she's walking at a pace. She's not exactly running, but she's walking at a pace. And as she's approaching the officers are repeatedly giving her commands to drop the knife, to stop, drop the knife, stop. As she's approaching the officers, she tells the officers, shoot me. She repeats that over and over again to them to shoot her. Shoot me, shoot me, shoot me. The officers, because of the fact that she was closing the gap between them as well as herself, the officers proceeded to take several steps back where they almost wind up close to the edge of spruce because they were trying to create that distance. The lady kept coming. They kept giving commands. The officers, both officers, stated that because they feared for their lives as well as the lives of their fellow officers, that was the officers that were there at the scene, they fired multiple shots, fatally wounding Mrs. Day. She was pronounced shortly after there at Wesley Medical Center, where she was transported by EMS. Like I said, when you look at the situation, the fact that the officers use as much judgment and diligence as far as trying to resolve this situation without resorting to deadly force. I can tell you that one of the officers, she had to make a decision. Do I use my taser or do I use my gun? But because of the fact that Miss Day was closing the distance, she made the decision to use her duty weapon, which was, in my mind, the right decision to make, because the lady with the knife was within 5 to 7 feet of her at the time that the officers fired, that she was that close. And so it just goes to show you what can happen in a matter of split seconds. And they estimated the time anywhere from 30 to 45 seconds from the time they encounter her to the time that they had to make the decision to use their weapons. This investigation is a joint investigation with the Sedgwick County District Attorney's Office, as well as the Kansas Bureau of Investigations, and also investigators from the Wichita Police Department. In keeping with protocol, the officers will be placed on administrative leave, which there again is protocol with the organization. When you look at the tenure of the officers, one officer has been on about 2 years, just over 2 years. The second officer has been on about a little over 5.5 years with the organization. And so, pretty straightforward. You know, like I said earlier, it's an unfortunate situation for the community, for the police department, as well as the family of Mrs. Day. But there again, we have to make those decisions to protect life, not only our lives, but the lives of others, and that's what the officers tried to do by addressing the threat that Mrs. Day presented to them. So I will open it up for questions. If I don't have questions, if I don't have the answers, I'll look over to Captain Allred or Lieutenant Oja.
Chief, you said, first of all, I'm a little confused. So she had the PFA taken out on her husband?
Correct. She had filed a PFA, protection from abuse order, against her husband.
But then she went to his house.
She went to his house. He was allowed to stay in the house based on the PFA. So she went to his house yesterday. She's been staying with her daughter for the last several months, from what we can gather, at a different location. But yesterday, she went to the house that he was awarded through the PFA.
And when she came at the officers with the knife pointed at them, how close were they in proximity when they decided they needed to shoot?
Within 5 to 7 feet, according to the officers. I mean, there again, when you look at on the porch, you had that distance of about 20 feet, and she quickly closed that distance of about 20 feet down to 5 to 7 feet in a matter of seconds. Not minutes, but in a matter of seconds. She closed distance.
Did they both fire their weapons?
Yes, they both fired their weapons.
Can you say how many times she was shot?
No. The autopsy is being conducted. That information will be released through NOLA's office once they complete the investigation.
Was she, you said she had a bottle. Was she under the influence? Alcohol? Or?
We won't know that till the tox results are completed.
Was it a beer bottle or something?
I don't know. Did we ever determine what kind of bottle it was? Whiskey bottle? Whiskey bottle.
You said, I gather, there was a history of domestic violence involving this lady. Is that true, or do you know if there's been a history of that?
It's my understanding that there has been a history of it, and I think that's one of the reasons she was able to get the protection from abuse order against her husband, is because of that history.
Was he ever arrested? Not last night, but in the past for domestic violence?
That I don't know. Captain has
yes, he's been arrested.
He's been arrested. Okay.
Prior to this incident.
Has she ever reported?
I didn't see an arrest for her.
Okay. And Chief, I I know you talked about this at the beginning a little bit, but, you know, gosh, it just seems like this is, you know, there have been a lot of police-involved shootings in the last few months. Any explanation? You know, people just more bold or?
Well, I think the key there is non-compliance, because when you look at each one of those situations, the officer gave commands for people to obey, to drop their weapons, to comply with what's going on, and they chose not to. They chose to escalate that situation to the point that we have to make a decision within split seconds to use deadly force. And the only ones that can really answer that question are the individuals that have made that decision. Keep in mind, we're called to those locations. It's not like we're just stopping by to see what's going on, but rather we're called there because of a reason, because people are concerned about the situation, their safety, and those kind of factors, and so we have to respond. So we're going into that situation. It goes back to what I mentioned about deadly mix, the fact that you have the officers, you have the offenders, and you have the circumstances coming together that sometimes has deadly consequences, and we've seen that. I can't think of a time in my 36 and a half years with the Wichita Police Department that we've had this many officer-involved shootings. And so there is no one answer. You just wish that people would comply with the instructions that's given them by the officers, because that way at the end of the day, you go to jail, you get out, you move on. But for some reason, people are choosing to be very confrontational and placing our officers in harm's way. And we're trained to respond to those situations, to defuse those situations to the best of our ability. And here lately it's been through the use of our weapons. Our weapons is part of the tools that we use to protect this city.
And the question about the taser, you know, families already saying, well, why did they just taser? Why did they do? If you would, can you kind of explain, like when you're out on a situation like that, do the officers have their gun in their hand if they see a weapon, or do they have their taser in their hand, or how is that?
The officers are processing the scene, processing that situation. They're assessing which tool is going to allow me to effectively defuse that situation. In this case, when the one officer saw the knife and he yelled knife to his colleague, they went to their duty weapons. Even though the one officer said, you know, I thought about my taser, but by the same token, my training has taught me that even with a taser, they can still probably cut me at some point in time. And so they're processing all of that information in a short amount of time. We can stand here today and process it, but they're out there in the trenches having to process it at night. And so there again, they know the tools that they have available to deal with the situation, and there again, they made that decision. I'm not going to second guess them, because they had to process it, they had to assess it, and they had to make the decision, and they made the decision.
How badly was she injured when she was approaching the officers?
One officer claimed that he could see blood on her blouse when she was on the front porch stabbing herself. So you have the series of stabbing happening on the front porch. As she's approaching the officers at a fast pace, she's continuing to try to stab herself, and then she's pointing the knife at the officers. All of this is happening in a short amount of time.
Can you walk us through a little bit what an officer following an incident like this has to deal with after this apparent, you know, possible suicide by cop situation, where they're basically forced into a situation that's just, there's very little way out other than to pull their weapon and fire?
Okay, you lost me.
I guess, could you just kind of walk us through what the officers have to deal with psychologically after being forced into a situation like this, or just how tough it is to...
Well, anytime you use your weapon, whether it's in a deadly situation or whether you wound somebody, that would forever change your life. So these officers that had to use their weapon last night, or the officers that had to use their weapon this year, their lives are forever changed. Their families are forever changed. Particularly those individuals that had to use deadly force. Because no one joins law enforcement with an idea of taking somebody's life. Our job is to protect the community and to utilize all of our training as best we can. And when you take a human life, that is with you for the rest of your life. And so it has a tremendous psychological impact. It changes how you live going forward as a person. Even though you did the right thing, you protect your life and the life of your colleague, or you protect the life of a citizen. That decision has a life-changing impact that you will never get back. You'll never get it back.
Chief, how many officer-related shootings have we had this year?
This year we've had 8. We've had 8 so far.
And how many were fatal?
4 of them were fatal. 2nd in Mosley was fatal. 35th in Everett. Of course, last night was fatal. And Crawford, 1201 West Crawford. Thank you. Those are the 4 fatals.
And Chief, when it gets to this point, when you've had this many, how are the officers, not the ones involved, but how are your other officers? You know, have you talked to them about, okay, guys, this is what's happening? You know, do you have special meetings to talk to them about other options rather than shooting, or, you know?
I would venture to say that the supervisors, they discuss it with the officers during squad meetings as far as here's what we're seeing and here's some things that you may want to be cognizant of, because there again, when you look at each one of those situations, the officers communicated repeatedly, and the person did not comply. They were put in a situation where they had to make that decision to use their weapons. And so even though we have all of this training as officers, at the end of the day, it comes back to the offender. It's a lot easier to comply with the officers, go to jail, get out of jail, go to court, and see another day.
Have there been any rulings on any of these other shootings so far?
No.